Welcome to the Reinvention Code. I'm your host, Dorinda Walker. Reinvention isn't random, it has a code. On this podcast, we'll explore what it really takes to navigate life's transitions with introspection, faith, and strategy. If you're evolving, rebuilding, or stepping into a new season, you're not just starting over, you're leveling up. Let's decode your next chapter together. Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode of the Reinvention Code podcast. Today, I want to talk about forgiveness. But before I go there, I want to start with something that I think is important, especially for anyone listening who has a loved one struggling with addiction. Because this is something I had to learn in a very real way. Addiction is a disease, but the person you love is still there. And sometimes those two truths are hard to hold at the same time because addiction can cause people to make choices that don't just impact their lives. It impacts everyone connected to them, right? It can create environments that are unstable. It could lead to broken trust. It can force children to grow up faster than they should. And if you've lived through that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's confusion, there's anger, there's disappointment, and sometimes there's a question that sits quietly in the back of your mind. How did this happen? How did this person I love become someone I don't recognize? And for a long time, I had to sit with that too, because my parents struggle with addiction. But today I'm going to talk about my mother, who struggled with addiction her whole adult life. And while I always knew who she was at her core, especially when I became an adult, I also experienced the reality of her choices. So I want to say this to anyone listening who may be in that space right now. It's okay to love someone and still acknowledge the impact of their actions. Those two things can exist at the same time. And that's where my story begins. If you read my book, Protected by Purpose, then you know my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. And by the time they found it, it had already spread throughout her body. There wasn't time to process it slowly, right? Everything moved fast in the last 3 months of her life. She came to live with me and my family during those last 3 months. She was in hospice care in my home, surrounded by the people she loved most, me, my late husband, and her grandchildren. She was so proud of all I had accomplished, and her grandchildren were her pride and joy. She spoiled my kids rotten whenever she had the chance. They called her Nana Weesey, and Nana Weesey was loving and kind, and it was something about those moments when time is limited, the conversations change, right? People start reflecting differently. And during that time, my mother started opening up to me in a way that she never had. She started talking about the guilt she had been carrying for years. She started talking about not protecting me the way she wanted to, how she wished she could have protected me from her boyfriend's abuse. She talked about the drug life I was exposed to so early. She talked about the ways she felt like she failed me as a mother because I had to grow up too fast. And during that time, I'll never forget this. She looked at me, she squeezed my hand, and she said something I'll never, ever forget. She said, "I don't deserve your love." And when I tell y'all I was floored, because in my mind, we were already well past it. We talked every day. We said, "I love you" all the time. She was my ride or die. So to hear her say that I didn't deserve her love, that was like a punch in the gut because I realized something in that moment that I never really thought about before. I had forgiven her a long time ago, but I never said it out loud. I thought our interactions proved it. I had done the work internally. I had processed my childhood and my feelings. I had worked through the anger, the disappointment. I had made peace with what had happened and what didn't happen, but I never said the words. So while I had moved on, she was still carrying guilt. And that realization stayed with me because it made me think, how many people are carrying something that we've already released and they didn't even know it? And I want to slow this part down a bit because forgiveness is often misunderstood. Forgiveness is not pretending something didn't happen. Forgiveness is not excusing behavior. And it definitely isn't saying that what happened didn't have an impact on your life. Forgiveness is making a decision about what you're going to carry and what you're going to release. And for me, that certainly didn't happen overnight. There are layers to it. There were moments when I was angry, moments where I was disappointed, moments where I had to grieve the childhood I didn't have. And that grief is real because sometimes you're not just forgiving what happened, you're grieving what didn't happen, the protection you didn't have, the stability you didn't experience, the version of life you thought you were supposed to have. And I had to sit with that. You can't skip over it. You can't rush it and say, I'm good. You have to actually process it. And over time, I made a decision, not once, but repeatedly, that I wasn't going to let my past dictate how I showed up in my life. That's when forgiveness became real for me. And I want to pause here for a moment because I think it's really important that I don't just talk about my mother through the lens of her addiction, because that's not who she was. That was something she struggled with. But it wasn't the totality of my mother. She was so much more than that. She was kind. She was generous. She had a big heart. I've seen my mother give her last dollar to someone in need without hesitation. Not because she had a lot, but because that's who she was. She didn't judge people. She accepted people for who they were, flaws and all. And that's something I carry with me to this day because I watched her live that out loud. She also taught me how to speak up for myself. Now, let me tell you something. My mother was only 4 feet, 11 inches, petite and tiny. Her nickname was Weesey. But she was a fireball. She did not play about me. I remember after I had that ignorant interaction with my manager who told me that I self-identified as Black first and a woman second, and my peers didn't respect me. As soon as I got back to my office, I called my mother and I told her what happened. And she said, what's the address to the parking lot? Because I'm going to meet that B in the parking lot and whoop her, you know what? And it made me laugh because she was dead serious. But I knew if I called her, and if someone disrespected me, she was ready to pull up. But I called her because I just needed to laugh and I knew what her response was going to be. That was my mom. She was protective, she was loyal, and she was real. She was also brilliant in ways people didn't always get to see. She had a beautiful falsetto voice and she could sing her face off. She was smart and talented and creative. Even while she was dealing with addiction, she was still making decisions out of love for me. There was a time when she removed herself from my life for 2 years. In fact, I thought she was dead, and it caused me a lot of trauma. After she died, her best friend told me that she cut me out of her life because of her love for me, because the man she was involved with during that time was her pimp, and he had threatened to bring me into that life, to expose me to drugs. And she made a conscious decision. She chose to remove herself to protect me. Now think about that. That's not a woman who doesn't care. That's a woman who understood that in that moment, that distance was safer than her presence. And then there was another moment when I was pregnant with my first child. And by that time, she was deep in her crack addiction. And I had made a decision for myself and for my child. I gave her an ultimatum. I told her, if you don't stop using crack, you will never see me or this baby in my belly. And I remember being so angry at her because it wasn't an easy conversation. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, but I was serious. But I also knew that I could not allow my children to experience what I had as a child. And here's what people don't always understand about addiction. Her crack addiction led her into prostitution because she couldn't function on crack. Unlike heroin, crack was something totally different. And it didn't just affect her behavior, it reshaped how she lived. But what I also saw in that moment was her love, because she did go to rehab and she never used crack again. Not once. And later she told me something that stayed with me. She said that ultimatum was the best gift that I ever gave her. She said her love for me is what freed her from crack, because she knew I was serious, y'all. Now, I want you to really sit with that for a second, because we don't talk about this enough. Sometimes love looks like boundaries. Sometimes love looks like distance. Sometimes love looks like saying no. And sometimes the hardest decisions we make are the ones that save the people we love. So when I talk about my mother, I just don't see her addiction. I see her big heart. I see her sacrifice. I see the ways she showed up for me, even when she was struggling. And I had to learn how to hold all of that at the same time. She made choices that impacted my life, and she also loved me deeply. She struggled, yet she still poured into me. And that's where understanding begins. My mother was never able to kick her addiction to heroin, but she was able to function, to go to work, to pay her bills. So I was able to accept it. And I think that's what makes this conversation about forgiveness so important. Because when you love someone who struggles with addiction, it's easy for their worst moments to become the only thing you see. But if you slow down and really reflect, you'll see the full person, the good, the lessons, the love. And I can honestly say my mother contributed so much to the woman I became. She taught me to be kind. She taught me to be strong. She taught me to stand up for myself. She taught me to give, even when I didn't have much. And I had to reconcile that. I had to hold on to both truths at the same time, that she struggled with addiction and that she still poured love into me, that there were things I didn't have and things she gave me that shaped my life in powerful ways. And I think for someone listening right now, that may be the part you're struggling with. How do you reconcile the person you love with the choices they make? How do you forgive when you've been impacted in the worst ways? And what I've learned is you don't have to choose one truth over the other, because both can exist. They are the person who made choices that hurt you. And they are also the person who loves you in the best way they know how. That's a hard truth, but it's an honest one. Now, let me bring this into leadership, because this is where it can get real, right? The way you process your personal experiences will absolutely show up in how you lead. And I don't mean just the big obvious ways. I mean in the small everyday moments. If you don't process your pain, You'll overreact in meetings. You'll hold on to things longer than you should. You'll misinterpret people's intentions. You'll struggle to trust because everything is filtered through what you haven't healed, right? You ever see a leader who carries everything? They carry grudges and hurt. They carry assumptions into situations. And what happens is they create tension that doesn't need to exist. They respond to people based on history, not the moment. And that's when leadership becomes reactive instead of intentional. For me, forgiveness became a leadership discipline, not just something personal, but something I practice in how I show up. Because I had already learned how to separate a moment from a mindset. I had already learned that just because something happened doesn't mean it needs to follow you into the next meeting. And that shows up in how I handle conflict. I try not to carry things or hold on to grudges. I address what needs to be addressed in that moment, and then I move forward. And that's not because I ignore things. It's because I've already done the work to process how I feel. And that's the difference. When you've done the internal work, you don't need external drama to validate your emotions. You can be clear, you can be direct, and you can still be at peace. And I'll be honest, that's why some people don't understand it, because they're used to people holding on to things. They're used to the tension lingering. They're used to the unresolved energy. So when you show up differently, it throws people off. I know I've done it a lot of times. But that's what healed leadership looks like. I remember getting into a heated discussion with a colleague who was a mentor and someone I trusted dearly. We disagreed on how to approach a situation, and we were both strong in our convictions. And we left that meeting agreeing to disagree. And the next time we were together was at a social work event, and we were sitting having drinks. And he said, "Dorinda, I hope you don't take offense to this, but you're like one of the boys. You know, there's not a lot of women that I've dealt with in the workplace that don't hold grudges. You're one of the only women I know who can go toe to toe in a meeting and then have drinks with me the next day." And I had to laugh. And I wasn't offended at all because I understood what he meant. Just because we disagreed didn't mean we had to lose respect or value for one another. It's okay to disagree. And this is where I want to be very clear. Forgiveness doesn't mean access. You can forgive someone and still have boundaries. You can love someone and still choose distance, especially when you understand that their behavior, whether it's addiction or anything else, creates an environment that disrupts your peace. That's not being mean, it's not being cold, it's being honest and taking accountability for your own well-being. And for me, this is also spiritual. There's scripture, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, that says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as God forgave you." And that hits differently after this experience, because forgiveness is not just about what someone else did. It's about what you're choosing to hold on to. And sometimes holding on to it costs you more than letting it go ever will. So before I close, here are my reinvention codes for this episode. Code 1, addiction is a disease, but accountability still matters. You can love the person and still be honest about the impact of their choices. Code 2, forgiveness is a process, not a moment. It takes time, honesty, and emotional work. Code 3, say what you've healed. If you've forgiven someone, don't assume they know. Say the words and tell them. Code number 4, forgiveness doesn't require access. Boundaries are not punishment. They're your protection. And code 5, unprocessed pain will show up in your leadership. Do the work, or it'll show up in how you lead and relate to others. So I'll leave you with this. On the other side of forgiveness is freedom. I hope this episode resonated with you. If it did, please share it, like, and comment. And until the next episode, I wish you much joy, much peace, and many blessings. Thank you for listening to the Reinvention Code. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who's stepping into their next season. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Remember, reinvention isn't random. It has a code. I'll see you next time.